Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock, and my teeth feel gritty. And all of a sudden,
I hope that's how you introduce yourself to new people. You're like, hi, Amber. This is my friend Ben. You're like, hi, I'm Ben. My teeth feel gritty.
Yeah, good to meet you, Amber. Your teeth ever fucking suck?
Maybe not that particular ailment every time. You announce something that's going on with your body.
Something kind of gross and unpleasant. And yeah. But I just realized, like, hey, all right, I'm ready to go if you are, and it's always something. But it's like, I'm ready to go, and wait a minute, my mouth feels fucked up.
I just realized I've got this knife sticking out of my thigh. Hold on.
Just remembered I have just every food I've ever eaten just lodged in my front teeth. Hang on a sec.
Anyway.
Welcome again. We're back again to the show again. The Non-Essential Podcast. It's a show where me and Steve get together every week and tell each other stories. Story time, really.
We just need like a fireplace crackling in the background. That's what the show's been missing.
Yeah, when we switch to video, that'll be the format.
God, I think that was the biggest mistake we ever made with our last podcast. Nobody wants to look at these faces.
But we can only afford one chair, so so every week somebody has to switch off and just sit like the kid. So yeah, I have a bit of a shorter story this week. I don't really remember much about yesterday, and like normally that accompanies like a lot of drinking. But yesterday was just kind of like, God damn it, I need a topic, but I just want to get this shit done and enjoy the rest of my weekend.
Mine's pretty short this week too, but it's good. So that's a good news for you listeners. You might actually get some like extra recess time at the end or something.
Yeah, you guys can go do something good for yourself. Let's just get to it. Well, here's the other thing. I couldn't be sure if you've talked about this one before. Which we say every week, but I really wasn't, like, I was really going through episodes like, fuck, did he bring this up? Maybe he did it on one of those episodes where he, like, brought up, like, 3 different stories, or...
I'll pretend to be surprised either way. How about that?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah. So, Donald Crowhurst was born in India to a British family in 1932. He spent his childhood there until moving back to Britain with his family after India gained their independence in 1947. Heading into his early adulthood, he joined the Royal Air Force, but was promptly kicked out for disciplinary reasons. The British Army would also expel him for the same reasons. Following that, Crowhurst began pursuing an academic career towards electronics engineering, while apparently driving race cars on the side. Like, that's... I love how people have time to do shit when it's like I work a minimum wage job and then I'm tired and that's my hobby.
I know if I go to work and come home and do like a load of laundry, I feel like the most accomplished person that's ever lived.
Oh God, don't even laundry. Ugh.
Right.
He's like, I'm going to go fucking race some cars and maybe get in a wreck. He would get married in 1957 and start his own business called Electron Utilization. I fucking hate that name for a company so much, and it would probably take weeks with a therapist to figure out why. But it's like...
there's not like something specific you hate about it. It's just you hear it and you're like, God damn it.
It's just all atoms use electrons, you fucker. Like, you just thought it sounded high-tech and cool. Like, it's like, I don't want to use the word electricity, so what sounds like that? But the company actually did make some impressive shit. One device was called the Navigator. Again, I hate the name.
Navigator?
Navigator.
So it's like somewhere that tells Kate where to go.
Yeah, basically. It's bossy. It's to mansplain to all women named Kate where you need to go. It was this device that used radio signals to determine a boat's position on the water, which, it's kind of boring, but it was actually a pretty high-tech invention ahead of its time. But the invention business isn't a stable one, And at this point, Donald had 4 children to think of, and his business just was not producing enough profit.
It's because of the name, so...
yeah, probably. If he named it, I make cool boat shit, he might have been better off.
Hire a marketer, people. It's important.
So needing money, he saw an ad for the Golden Globe race. For some reason, Britain was all about sailing at this time. In 1967, a Francis... I'm not sure if this is Chichester or Chichester, but it's one of those. He sailed a yacht around the world in record time and returned a national hero, which seems like a stretch to me. Like, yeah, I'm not saying it didn't take work, but it's kind of like saying I flew around the world in my private jet, or I had my tiny house carried to the top of Everest. Like you did it in comfort, to be fair. Right. But newspapers were challenging somebody to beat this achievement with a cash prize that would have been around $75,000 in today's money. Crowhurst was a big fan of Chichester, and he relished the opportunity to put his electronics engineering knowledge and his, quote, military experience, which he had actually very little, to the test.
My experience getting kicked out of military should help me.
Yeah, I have a long history of disciplinary problems, so I should be okay. While Crowhurst did sail, he was certainly an amateur, but he did convince a millionaire named Stanley Best to sponsor his entry. Using the money, he built what was called the Teignmouth Electron. Teignmouth is the name of a town, and Electron because he only knows one word. But it wasn't a lot of money he was given to build this boat, and it was built in a time crunch. The hull was made of plywood, hatches weren't sealed, and the boat leaked a lot.
That's not that important.
Now, you might be thinking, taking this rickety fucking thing out into the ocean would certainly be disastrous, even with the proper safety equipment. Crowhurst forgot the proper safety equipment and set sail.
Details.
So on the last possible day to depart, October 31st, 1968, Crowhurst began his just fucking doomed journey from the starting point of Teignmouth, Devon. Other sailors already had a good head start on him, but it's important to remember that this wasn't a straight-up win the race sort of thing, but to have the fastest time. So the boats didn't have to start at the same time. It was just about, who had the quickest time as far as starting and finishing. But Crowhurst and his rickety-ass boat weren't that fast either. During a pre-race trial with the Teignmouth Electron, he took it into the English Channel to test its seaworthiness. This was a trip that should have taken a few days, and it took him 2 weeks.
Good start.
But Crowhurst literally mortgaged his house to cover the sponsorship money, and he was not going to admit defeat, even though to everyone watching, he was defeated before the race had even started. This story is like, it goes in line with our theme of like talking about kind of fuck-ups, but it's also a really kind of depressing and sad one, because Crowhurst was apparently pretty distraught on the day of his departure. His worried family saw him off, and he told his wife before he, set sail that he knew the boat wasn't ready, and that he had to live by his choice, and he wanted to take care of his family. Which, like I said, is sad.
Yeah, but it's also stupid.
Right. Like that's the thing. Like, have you really never been fucking broke before, dude? Like make meth. Breaking Bad was the story of a fucking psycho with a really bad idea to make money, and it's a better plan than this.
Plus, they could have called it like electron meth.
Yeah, electron crystal. Like it would. If that brand doesn't take off, I don't know what will. So the family was able to keep track of his movements on a map as he maintained radio contact whenever possible. But the family knew that his boat was too small and slow to possibly win this dumb challenge. And then they didn't hear from him for 11 weeks.
Yeah. I'm sure that wasn't as stressful.
Yeah, it was terrible. And then something amazing happened. He supposedly hopped on the radio channel claiming he traversed 243 nautical miles in one day, which at the time would have been a record. And if he continued at that pace, he actually made that 30,000-mile race very winnable.
That noise you hear in the background is the hurricane I'm riding on.
I actually got carried off in a tornado. He said he was even already rounding the Cape of Good Hope in Africa after just having made great time around South America into the Pacific Ocean.
That's just good, because that's a notoriously calm area of the world.
And then nobody ever heard from him again. You have to assume everything he told him at that point was probably a lie. Because 8 months after he had started, his boat was found by a passing ship in the mid-Atlantic, very far from where he said he actually was.
So it sounds like he knew he was screwed, but he didn't want them to know that he knew that.
Yeah, so Crowhurst himself was nowhere to be found, and only a logbook remained. Right near the beginning of his journey, he was already doubting his chances, and aside from it being a terrible idea, poorly planned, and poorly funded, any successful survival story you'll ever come across, and like a race challenge like this is definitely a survival challenge in a lot of ways. Like, there's one common theme of like a story that works versus works out versus a story that doesn't, and that's self-belief. Like, not to Bear Grylls you, but it's actually very important you go in with high spirits and you believe you can get through it.
Even if it's not necessarily high spirits, it's got to be this determination, this I can do this.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying you can't have moments of doubt, because everybody's going to, but it's there. It takes that special, like, I'm going to live, not this, oh man, I'm fucked.
Right. And the fact that he didn't have that going into the challenge, like, you can't overstate just how damning that would be when you, like, try to do something like this. He wrote, "Wrecked by the growing awareness that must soon decide whether or not I can go on. What a bloody awful decision to chuck it in at this stage." And while the details of Crowhurst's true fate remain unknown, his final log entry read, "It is finished, it is finished, it is the mercy, I will resign the game." This log entry was made on July 1st, 1969, and the boat was found just 10 days later, following his, at this point you assume he's dead. And the winner of the Golden Globe race, a Robin Knox Johnston, donated the prize to the Crowhurst family after he learned about the tragedy. So that was a pretty nice move of him. The story got a movie made actually last year that I didn't know about, but it seems kind of weird to me because the story is just this like ridiculous bummer that's like perfect for our show, but not really how you make a 2-hour drama.
Right, because there's not really a happy. I mean, if you could consider the actual winner being like, "Oh, that sucks here. I don't want you guys to starve." That's not really the like. And I'm not saying you have to have a happy ending for Hollywood. Some of my favorite movies don't, because I love when they just like forgo that cliche. But it has to have some kind of like ending, like impactful ending, not just like, and he wasn't heard from ever again.
Yeah, like it's. There is a lot of, like, detail of, like, this was a guy who really, he did love his family a lot, and they loved him. But, this is truly a story about, like, a man's pride getting in the way of, like, what's important.
It's hard from what you've described. I imagine it's pride, because every time, he kind of mentions this, like, oh, my family needs this, but I can't, I don't, who wants to admit failure now? It's like, somebody that wants to not be dead,
right? You're right. It's a very.
It would be one thing if it was like this ship is iffy, but man, look how much it flies in the water. But it's like this thing barely works, and it's iffy.
And while he worked with like boat devices and stuff, like this wasn't like you tapping into some passion. Like this wasn't. Like, this was seeing an ad and thinking, like, oh, I could probably do that. And then like,
well, that's what made me wonder if he somehow convinced himself that this was his one chance to like, so his family doesn't like lose everything. And it's like, well, it sounds like he's smart enough and had the like motivation enough to find a different chance.
Yeah. You know, like, and it seemed like you'd probably, fuck, dude, you went to school for electronics engineering. You can find a job. Like, there's a future in store for you. You like, maybe your company bombs, but like, you're not toast, and like, you can recover. Like I said, like, seriously, you've never been broke before. Like,
it is super like sad and tragic, like the way you described his departure and like that resignation. Like, he just knew, like, well, this is gonna not work.
Yeah.
But and it's like you said, it's easy to be. It's a little mind-boggling for us to be like, then why did he do it? But man, we as humans, we let ourselves get in some weird spaces.
That's like, totally true. Like, it's easy to be the outsider looking in, but it's like, you know, I've certainly, you know, put myself in positions where it's like, you know, you should really walk away from this, but it's like, God damn it, I refuse to. Yeah, I can't give up. You know, for one reason or another. And but sometimes that's determination. Sometimes it's outright just being an asshole. You know.
But it's interesting too that, and it's just one of those things that's frustrating with history, because it's like there's no way to ever really know, unless something really unusual like turns up. But like, it'd be one thing if it's like, okay, he was never heard from again and his boat sank because it was in such bad condition. But for them to like find the boat and only 10 days after his last log entry, it's like, what exactly occurred?
Well, yeah, like, yeah. You know, so people think like, you know, he might have just, you know, steadily lost his mind out there, and, you know, and if you're already going in, like we talked about, in a fucking really, it sounded like he was already in a pretty dark place, mentally and emotionally, and then like he just apparently just coasted for, you know, months, and you have to wonder, like, if he even went out there like to actually try to win the challenge, or just to escape and not have to like face what he perceived to be like this great failure of not being able to help his family.
Right. And it would give him an out that makes it look almost heroic. Like, I'm going to try against all odds.
Yeah. It's so, just, you know, kind of wrap up the story of your, like, the boat itself is apparently sitting on some beat up shrine in the Caribbean. Looters removed the nameplate, and on the wooden wreckage, somebody just spray painted Dreamboat on it.
Dick.
Yeah. And it's like, it's a really kind of appropriately tragic display kind of like what the story it's centered around. Because like we said, like, this is a story, there's a lot of funny little details about it, but it's really just a story of like a man's pride, just like, you know, trumping everything else in his life. And
it leaves so many behind. Some of the best stories leave blanks for us to like sit and fill in ourselves. Like, you got him at, like, was he out there? He wasn't an avid boater. Navigation, especially then, is so important. And if you can't do that,
yeah,
you know, like you said, he would have been out there for what was it, months? You said before.
Yeah, it was like 8 months when they found his boat.
And it might not be that he was out of food or sinking, but if you just, after 8 months, if you feel like you're completely lost in the middle of this just vast blue, like, for a lot of people, I think it's hard to comprehend what that would feel like.
And also, it's worth noting that the boat was relying on wind. This was sailing, you know,
right,
as like his primary. It was the reason why they were like, even his wife was like, this boat's not going to fucking win, because you're relying on the wind to take you everywhere. And depending on how that goes, he might be using the wind, but might be going in a fucking circle in the Atlantic. Like, that's the thing. Nobody knows.
Right. And so I get that too, that feeling. It's probably just depression, and he gave up.
Yeah.
And and that's the bitch of it, is like, I've been out here adrift with no real control over this boat. I'll never see my family again. This is the end. And then 10 days later, boat finds him like, hey, We can bring you to show. Hey, where are you at?
Like, I wasn't really thinking about it when I put the notes together. I was kind of just putting down the details, like what we know about the story. But now that we're like talking about it, I'm thinking about just how much of like how much of this is really a depression story, and like because it's just dawning on me like he probably had no intention of actually doing this fucking race.
Well, a lot of ways it reminds me of that, and I know because we've talked about this a couple times that you're way more familiar with the story than I am. I don't even know the guy's name, but the Into the Wild.
Yeah. I want to say the guy's name was McCandless or something like that. Or
that sounds like I said. I've watched a couple documentaries on it, and of course the references.
Yeah, I had to read a book about that in college, and I had to read that book and write about it in college. And
I've listened to the not Pearl Jam, but the Eddie Vedder soundtrack to the movie like 100 times because it's actually a pretty good soundtrack. But anyway, no, it sounds like a similar. Like the difference was that guy kind of felt alienated and alone and wanted to go out on this journey by himself, and this guy, he may have felt the same way. He had a family and he obviously cared about him, but that doesn't mean emotionally he didn't feel.
Yeah. Well, that guy was. I just looked it up. It is Christopher McCandless. And the thing about, and we had to do like debates in my class about this, and I remember I got in kind of a heated one with this older woman in the class, and she was like, he just threw his life away, and I was like, reading the book and reading everything he like wrote about while he was out there, like McCandless wasn't like, I'm sure there was some depression and isolation there, but what killed McCandless wasn't like a giving up sort of thing. Like he only
it was a series of like minor mistakes that kind of snowballed into catastrophe.
Yeah, the big thing that killed McCandless was like, and this is more, if anything, it's proof that he was trying to live out there. He was eating like these pumpkin seeds or something, or maybe he thought they were pumpkin seeds. I don't really remember. But they were like molded and shit, and it fucked up his digestive system.
Right, and gave him, and he had kind of vastly underestimated the amount of food he should take with him versus what he thought he could forage for.
Right. And
then when you add, frankly, diarrhea, that
right
to it, you dehydrate yourself very quickly, and that's what the difference between that guy and this guy from your story was he was relatively close to civilization, but he got very quickly into it where he was stranded, and then this guy was not close to civilization.
Well, like the fucked up thing for McCandless's situation, and if you don't know the story, like I haven't watched the movie, but I really actually like the book a fair bit. But Into the Wild, the thing about his situation was like he got cut off due to where he was at, and then this shit made him sick. So even when the path would have opened back up and he would have had a route to get back to civilization, he was so sick and weak there was just no way.
Right. I think he was only a 2-day hike from like getting back to.
Yeah.
Although there's that river that he had to cross, and that I just remembered where the bulk of my information from it. That's one of those stories that I think we've all just heard bits and pieces of, and it's general knowledge. But Josh Gates, Expedition Unknown, actually, it's one of my favorite shows. They did an episode on it because there's like a old kind of rusted out VW like hippie van that you always see in like the movie and the marketing materials, and it wasn't his, but it was where he took shelter, and it's still there. So now people now make that pilgrimage to kind of pay respects and just see where
get an image of like what where he was.
And so that's kind of another cool parallel with this guy's boat being down in the Caribbean, is you could technically do that, even though
nobody's drawing Dreamboat onto the side of the van.
No, people in, you said McCandless or McCandlish, in his story, they kind of, I think most people, at least up there that do that in nature, understand him more than I. And I'll admit, like a lot of people when you hear the general story, they write it off as this guy that was basically suicidal and he's an idiot and he killed himself. And when you dig into it, it wasn't. It's like you said, it wasn't that at all.
It was more, and it's interesting. Like I'm kind of glad that you brought it up because like it's an interesting comparison because it's like I get the mentality of both of them, but they are different. Like between McCandless and Crowhurst, like McCandless has a very like I get the idea of feeling kind of isolated in the middle of society, and so there's a part of you that just like wants to, you know, like
well, his goal wasn't to like go out and live in nature forever. He was just kind of taking a solo hike to find himself.
Well, I mean, before that, he was this kind of, he was just adrift. Like he didn't really,
right.
He didn't feel like he had a home. Like in a weird way, he kind of felt most at home when he was away from everyone.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of issues there that stem from that. Crowhurst is a more directly depressing mentality that I also totally understand. And it's less about, like, I feel like McCandless was trying to, there's the key difference to me, having kind of read about both of them and based on, I'm far from an expert on both of them, but McCandless was trying to find something out in the woods. And
to live for, find a meaning. And
Crowhurst was trying to run away from
from
what he perceived as like his failure of a life.
I'd argue, just based on I've got more knowledge of McCandless and less of Crowhurst because I hadn't heard of Crowhurst, and so the good news I had not covered. In the past. God. Although it did sound super familiar when you started, like with he was in India and he moved back and he got kicked out of. Yeah. I almost feel like maybe I've come across a story but didn't get, because once you got into it, it wasn't one. Every now and then you'll do one that I know I've read online before when I was looking for topics. Yeah. But no, I didn't know this one at all. But that beginning sounded so damn familiar. Yeah. But anyway, my point is, all I know about Crowhurst is what you said today. But I'd argue between the two, if you wanted to say one was quote unquote suicidal, it was Crowhurst, not and I like I said, it's a mentality. I can relate to both of them, but they are different. But it is an interesting comparison. But it would be very, very interesting to know what exactly transpired over Crowhurst's last month or so.
Because I don't even think Crowhurst like went out directly like, I'm going to go die on this boat. But I think there was an element of just like, I just don't want to face whatever is looming. I don't want to. I don't want to deal with the financial struggle. I don't want my family to be ashamed of me, And
it could have been that, or it could have, like I said, if he really couldn't navigate and control that boat, it could have just been that. I mean, put any of us for a week in the middle of the ocean with no way to really, at the time you didn't have a great way to radio. You could, I guess you could argue he could have got on the radio and said, "Help, I'm lost," and at least had people looking for him, and he didn't do that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, was it just this feeling of, like, I'm out here and just there's no way out off of this boat?
Well, and that's an interesting side of depression that you don't really hear a lot about. I mean, these things are talked about a lot more today than they were, say, 10 years ago. But it's like when you think like a suicidal person, you think somebody like really like kind of like gung-ho about self-harm. As far as like, they want to commit suicide, but there is a side of depression of like, I just don't really care if I die.
Right. They don't necessarily, and they might actually partake in activities that death is a very realistic outcome, but it's not necessarily, they're not putting a gun to their head. They're just like, well, I'm going to do this and maybe I'll die, maybe I won't, but I don't really care either way.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that leads to a series of more and more like risky behaviors, but not necessarily, like you said, I think people overlook that too. A lot of times it's not, I'm going to go kill myself. It's just, if this kills me, who cares?
Yeah. And I that's kind of the vibe I pick up from Crowhurst's story. And you could maybe argue McCandless had a little bit of that too, but I think McCandless was just a little more like, I think he valued the experience of going out there, that he didn't concern himself with the dying risk.
I think one of the things that, like I said, I had my like general knowledge of his story up until I got like the more in-depth, and the general really leads people to think, it was this suicide mission and he was going out in the woods and there's no way. I think what gets washed over for a lot of people is he was on trails that were actually established. It wasn't like he was just, I'm going to go walk through Alaska.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were very remote trails. It's not like he was on like a park system.
And also,
but
like I said, he's done stuff like that before. Like not not where he was at there, but he had wandered and explored. He's done it plenty of times, and he would pop back into society, maybe work an odd job here and there, and then he would go back out again.
Right. Know? And then the area that he was at was one that other people would have been to before too. I mean, it wasn't like just some crazy like, I'm going to go climb Mount Everest in my underwear with no help or supplies. You can argue he was undersupplied, but it wasn't like so grossly that it was like an obvious.
Yeah,
you know, he thought he was supplied well enough, and he wasn't. But it still probably would have worked without that unfortunate, side effect of getting sick. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, interesting parallels between those two stories. But
and it carried me to the half-hour mark, so thank you.
So, like I said, mine's pretty short, but it's one that I set out looking for one thing and found something else.
Something wonderful.
Yes, something weird. It takes a weird turn. But mine's a ghost story this week.
Hell yeah, dude! We switched roles. I talked about the depressing fuck up explorer, and you're going into the paranormal. Awesome.
And that's not necessarily an accident. I'm like, man, Ben always brings these. I want to do this too.
It's fun.
But I've made it no secret that I don't particularly believe in the actual existence of ghosts, but that I do find them interesting.
Your best quote was something along the lines. Probably my favorite line doing this show was when you were like, I don't believe in this, but I'm wrong about a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff, right? But I've always thought, like, one of the things that I always point to with like how worked up we get over ghosts, and like I've said, I'll do it too. Where on the one hand I'll say I don't necessarily believe that ghosts are even real. On the other hand, I can hear a good ghost story and not want to turn the lights out for a week. Like, I think a lot of us do that.
Well, yeah. But why would I fuck around?
But one of the things I've always pointed out about why I think that's funny is we get so freaked out about ghosts, but there's never been one documented case of a person being killed by a ghost. But then I found out about the Hammersmith Ghost and found out that I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. So I'll probably use a really... I kind of planned on using a corny ghost story voice for this, but so in 1803 the Hammersmith district of West London became the center of a series of bizarre ghost sightings. The specter, who was said to appear at night, was extremely tall and draped in cloths of white which glowed eerily in the dark. Or sometimes the ghost appeared wearing a calfskin garment with horns and large glass eyes, because consistency.
Wardrobe's important.
Mm-hmm. Back then, it was apparently common for ghosts to be seen shambling about, frightening those who had the misfortune to witness their haunting presence.
That's why gentlemen carried hitting sticks to be like, get back, ghost.
The reason I put that line in there is because as I was reading about this and some of the other stories, it seemed like a time when, a ghost, a series of sightings or ghost stories would crop up, and not like lore from the past, but like, oh, this place is haunted, and people would just be like, yeah, sure, that's a thing that happens. So it just seemed very accepted that, oh, we've got a ghost. But the Hammersmith Ghost was an even more sinister spirit who was said to actually actively assault its victims. The ghost was often encountered near the cemetery and churchyard. One night, a woman was passing by the area, and she was confronted by the ghost. Before she could turn to run, the ghost reached out and grabbed her in a vice-like grip. Try as she might, she could not escape, and the ghost kept squeezing tighter and tighter until suddenly the woman passed out. She would die a few days later after having never regained consciousness. So that's what I mean. Person killed by a ghost, documented. I was wrong.
Fact.
But it makes me wonder, if she was assaulted by a ghost and passed out and then died a few days later, how do people know she was assaulted by the ghost? Because she couldn't tell them.
Because there's nothing else with a vice-like grip.
Yeah, it's just, that's one of those things with these ghost stories that I love. They're like, oh, she was so frightened she passed out and died a few days later. It's like, then how do you know she didn't just slip and hit her head? It's like, nope, ghost.
She was also in a fucking cemetery, which...
Right. It was just, I mean, you find a woman at night in a cemetery, passed out, ghost. What other explanation could it be?
Could have been a mugging, but, you know. Hey.
But maybe they based it on this, because on another occasion, a man was returning home from work and was also confronted by the ghost, who grabbed him by the neck and held him with otherworldly strength. The victim attempted to fend off his assailant by, and I quote, this is one of my favorite quotes I've ever come across, by pushing my fist at him. So not punching.
So no wonder fucking it felt like an otherworldly strength. You don't know what a punch is.
Right. I formed a fist and pushed it at him.
I've never experienced a power like this. It's like you would be blown up in a pillow fight, dude.
Right. I have never in my life heard somebody describe a punch as pushing my fist.
I can only ascribe that to like somebody comedically telling me about how they lost a fight.
But anyway, so he pushed his fist at the ghost, but his fist pushing ran into something impossibly plush, like a great soft coat, or, you know, it's just a regular big.
I could coat. Go no further. I pushed with all my might, but it only became more cuddly.
But eventually the ghost would let the man go, and he would live to tell his fist-pushing tale.
Even the ghost is just staring blankly, like, what? That's your best, that's your punch?
I can kill women, but man, I draw the line at this guy. Man,
that woman I killed needed a vice-like grip, and you just pissed yourself. I haven't even touched you yet.
So a carriage driver reported an encounter in which the ghost suddenly appeared in the street and attempted to stop the wagon he was driving. But the driver was no fool and said, and I quote, no, okay, I don't quote, I made this quote up, but, "Fuck you, ghost, I have horses," and frantically sped off down the street.
Just another occasion of somebody not being able to hail a goddamn cab.
Fuck you, ghost, I'm out of here.
What a fucking jerk. Like, see
and
what
then I'm
wants.
Just picturing this like carriage just careening down the street in like an all out like whatever.
Could have been a goddamn emergency, like an actual person needing help, and the guy's like, "Fuck that, it's a ghost." It's like, you paranoid bastard, chicken shit.
Apparently this ghost was rather rude, because he also was reported as having knocked to the ground an elderly woman.
This is the fucking lamest ghost ever. Like, he's just beating up old women, and
right.
And apparently
and
people
sissies
who can't punch.
I can't fight. Yeah, I will fist push you good sir. So as the stories of these encounters spread, rumors started to surface suggesting that it's, you know, kind of guessing at the impetus for these ghost attacks. It was said that a man had recently committed suicide and that he had then been buried in the church cemetery. And as everybody knows, those who have killed themselves should never be buried on hallowed grounds, because then their spirits will never be able to find peace.
So that was like for a street fight, apparently.
Right. So that was the common explanation at the time. Like, dude, they fucked up and this guy killed himself and they put him in the church, and now we've got a ghost that pushes over old women. So, for the most part, this was a more than plausible story to explain the sudden appearance of a violent ghost who, for some reason, sometimes also wore a costume with horns instead of his like typical like ghost like bedsheet thing.
It's like when wrestlers like just once in a while decide to come out in a mask or something. It's like,
right?
Why? We know who you are.
It's like, come on, ghost, you look like a cow. You know, that's not your normal costume. And the ghost's like, I felt like mixing it up. Push. The haunting continued. A pregnant woman and an elderly woman who had, on separate occasions, been accosted by the ghost were said to have died of fright within days of their encounter. So that's 3 more victims. But I love that one. It's like, oh, we were so scared that we went home, and then 3 days later decided we needed to just die because we're still scared.
I mean, to be fair, like, if, you know, if they called these assaults or whatever, the assaulter would be a murderer in these instances, because one thing leads to another.
I mean, right. I mean, it did result in their deaths, apparently. The sightings and the assaults became more frequent and more violent in nature. People living and working around Hammersmith became so frightened by the stories that they basically stopped going anywhere after dark.
Oh, shit. We might actually have to learn to throw a punch.
What do you mean throw a punch? You mean push a punch?
You mean caress a punch?
I'm going to thrust my hands at you, good sir. Things got so bad that actually local business owners began having problems receiving deliveries because drivers refused to venture down the haunted streets.
I'm going to mush you with my knuckles, dear sir.
On December 29th of 1803, a night watchman by the name of William Girdler spotted the spook while out on patrol.
Whoa!
But William was hang on.
You can't say that.
Spotted the spook.
Yeah,
I liked it. I was running out. I mean, there's only so many times you can type the word ghost in your notes.
Yeah, but you don't. I'm gonna have to edit that out. It's 2019. Drop that.
You'll love this next part. William, he wasn't so easily frightened, however, and he began chasing the ghost, but was unable to catch up to it.
You're a fucker. You're a goddamn
That's not going to make sense to anybody listening.
Nobody's going to know what that means, but you're an asshole.
Anyway, he didn't catch the ghost, but then the ghost vanished into thin air. But then, a few days later, on January 4th, things would finally turn around for the district of Hammersmith. Girdler, the same watchman who had run off the ghost, came across one of a number of armed citizens who had taken to patrolling the streets. Because the guns can solve everything, even ghosts' attitude is not actually strictly an American invention. It's something that goes way back to London as well.
Well, I mean, it works in Devil May Cry. Shoot ghosts all the time in that game. So.
They probably had like salt pellet, bullets and that kind of stuff. I've seen Supernatural.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's just lead.
Or silver bullets if it's a werewolf, but this is a ghost.
It's a lead bullet, but I wrote the word silver on each one.
If your last name is Silver, does that make every bullet you have a silver bullet?
If your last name is Silver, you're destined to hunt monsters.
All right.
Forever.
So this guy's last name was not Silver, it was Smith. But Francis Smith was a tax officer, everybody's favorite person. But he was out on patrol, armed with a shotgun.
Finally, just what he needed for his fucking boring,
my ghost shotgun. But he ran into Girdler, and they made a plan to meet up and, if possible, hunt down the vicious ghost.
Me and my friends were watching a Bigfoot movie that was like basically the same setup, and it was terrible.
Sounds pretty good. But Girdler had to make his 11 o'clock call first, which I assume just means it's round. He's a night watchman, so I assume he had to report in or something. But then he would meet up with Smith, and they would, commence the hunt. But just after 11, before Girdler could meet back up with him, Smith suddenly encountered the being. "Damn you!" he yelled. "Who are you, and what are you? I'll shoot you." And then he shot him, and he killed the ghost. Unfortunately for Smith, and more so for the ghost, this particular ghost was actually a man named Thomas Millwood, who was a local bricklayer who had been walking to his parents' home after work, still wearing the standard all-white uniform that every bricklayer wore at the time.
God.
Right. So this was just some dude wearing white.
You assholes.
So Smith's shot had struck Millwood in the jaw and continued until it severed his spine. He had died instantly. Millwood, the one that was just murdered, had just left his sister's house, and I mean just left her house. They had said goodbyes, and she closed the door, and then she heard Smith shouting. Bang. Right, literally, she heard Smith say, basically, "Stop or I'll shoot," and then he shot. So as the smoke cleared, Girdler, the watchman, Smith's neighbor, John Locke, and a man named George Stowe had come across the scene. Because, again, all these people were starting to, patrol the cities, trying to kill a ghost. And they found one very agitated Francis Smith. They told Smith to head home, but before he could, a constable showed up and arrested him. So, during the trial, Millwood's widow would testify that she had actually warned her husband to change or at least put on, a dark coat when walking at night because he had already been mistaken for the ghost once before. She told...
She's not wrong, but, man, fuck that. So anybody wearing white's gonna get fucking shot because these dipshits can't fucking
Well, that apparently was
stop
Millwood's
their
like
ghost hunting?
Yeah, and I think that was Millwood's thing. Is like, these people are fucking stupid. I'm not doing that because they're idiots. But she'd tell the story about how a stagecoach driver had come across him one night and shouted something at him, to which Millwood responded something like, "I'm a bricklayer, you fucking moron. Leave me alone or I'll punch you in your stupid fucking face." So I, of course, made that quote up too. But her testimony in court, her exact quote was that he shouted some bad words and asked if he wanted to be punched in the head. So it had to be something like that. Like, get the fuck out of here, you idiot.
You're so stupid.
Millwood's sister would testify that while she had heard Smith yell to stop or he'd shoot, he then immediately shot without giving Millwood a chance to respond or, stop. So it's one of those, like...
Which is like it's one of those early South Park episodes where it's like, we can get away with it if we just say it's coming right for us.
I didn't think of that. I was thinking more of like Barney Fife if he actually carried bullets. Like the, "Stop or I'll shoot you, bam!" It's like, oh, fuck, that was Otis or who, I don't know those characters.
Otis the Ghostess.
So, as utterly ridiculous as Millwood's murder was, the trial would actually go on to become one of the more important cases regarding the legal differentiation between concepts such as self-defense, manslaughter, and murder. The presiding judge, Lord Chief Baron, the best fucking name for old-timey judge.
It's really going to test, like, how do we judge stupidity going forward?
That's really what this turned out to. But the judge in the case was quick to point out that Smith was neither acting in self-defense, because he was not in danger, nor was the act of shooting Millwood accidental. It wasn't like he didn't mean to shoot him. He 100% meant to shoot him. The judge instructed the jury that malice was not required for killing to be murder, but just rather murder was merely required, only needed the intent to kill. Basically saying, you don't have to set out to be like, I'm going to murder someone for it to be murder, but just that you're intentionally trying to kill someone, or in this case, something.
Huh. It's interesting, though, because he was on the hunt, And
he wasn't the only one, scarily enough.
So if you shot somebody thinking they were a deer, like that would be... Would that be murder? Or?
Well, that's why it would be an interesting court case, and we'd see what Lord Chief Baron would have thought.
At the same time, you're hunting something as preposterous as a ghost, and you're, like, not even thinking that it could be a man.
Like, that's where my notes go next. Although, it's what he argued was that even if he thought that it was a ghost, he certainly meant to kill whatever it was. But nobody actually Smith thought that Millwood was a real ghost. As fun as it would be to pretend that people in 1803 were all such like superstitious idiots that they believed a murderous ghost was terrorizing the town, many had come to the conclusion that the ghost was actually just a criminal, in disguise, which was probably hinted at by the fucking calfskin, like, cow head with horns and glass eyes. Like, of course it was a person in disguise and not a ghost, because ghosts don't have to wear costumes.
Right.
So, but in the eyes of the jury, that could actually help at least make Smith's actions like understandable, if not, justifiable. It wasn't that he's such an idiot he thought he was shooting a ghost, but he thought he was shooting an actual, criminal that had been accosting people. So after deliberation, they came back with a verdict of manslaughter. If you are not familiar with the law, while manslaughter certainly isn't a minor offense, its legal implications are way different from murder, because manslaughter simply means that your actions inadvertently resulted in the death of another individual. So that would be where your like deer example would probably come into court. You weren't trying to kill a person, but you did. So it's still something, but it's not murder. The judge was having none of that, though. He reminded the court that, for starters, Smith had not witnessed Millwood do anything wrong, and that even if Millwood had been the quote-unquote ghost, nothing the ghost had done would merit being shot and killed. The ghost crimes were just misdemeanors worthy of a fine at best, which tells us that all these tales of people dying or being accosted... Yeah. Haha, we figured it out. But basically, all these ghost stories were what people always fucking do. None of it was actually real, but it just kind of got out of hand, or if it was, yeah.
That thing of like one person tells one story and then 15 people down the line, it's become this complete.
I saw the
thing.
ghost. Well, I got attacked by the ghost and pushed my fist at him because I am brave, or something.
Why are you telling that story like as a bragging thing? You pushed.
Maybe I'm making fun of this guy for no reason. Like maybe he actually had lost his hand in a industrial accident earlier in the day. And so when he got accosted, he literally had his hand in like a bag and he pushed it at him like
no,
he was just yeah.
It's just shameful.
But anyway, like I said, the judge was like, that's not fucking manslaughter. And he basically informed the jury that he's either guilty of murder or he's not guilty at all. So they reconvened and then came back with a guilty verdict, which in my opinion is kind of the correct interpretation of the law. However, the punishment for murder in London in 1803, I guess 1804 at this point, was death by execution with no exceptions.
Yeah, get his ass.
So Smith was sentenced to be hanged and then dissected because I guess that was a thing. Like,
what the fuck?
Yeah. How?
You know what? We've talked about it many times, and certainly doing this show has made me think a lot about how I feel about like capital punishment and the death penalty and stuff. But I think, you know, if you're going to go out with this idea of I'm going to hunt and kill a thing, I think the moment you step out with your gun, you need to think about like, you know,
well, right.
Like your life should be on the table too, you know?
And of course that's a lot of purposeful misdirection in this story to set up the ghost story, because it is based around, you know, the Hammersmith Ghost was the impetus for this whole the chain of events. But it's like the judge said, he knew they weren't out hunting for a actual ghost, but they were out hunting for somebody that had been, you know, accosting people, but that didn't justify shooting them, even if they had caught an actual criminal, because, you know, short of that one woman, you know,
that at best it's vigilantism, you know?
Exactly. But anyway, so he was sentenced to death, but probably because of the large amount of attention that this case got. You know, it was one of the, you talked about a media sensation case last week, and that also is not a modern invention. You know, this got a lot of attention back then. He was able to appeal his sentencing to the actual King of England.
Who said, "You shot a ghost, my lord."
My lord, you are now the king. Take your rightful place on the throne.
You are the second king. Serve with me.
So I don't necessarily agree that he should have been hanged for this. So the good news there is that his execution was overruled. The fucking dumb thing is that his sentence was commuted to 1 year's hard labor. So once again, we've had many stories like this where it goes between, it's like he should be killed for this or slapped on the wrist.
Yeah, no judicial middle ground.
And I get it. A year's hard labor, especially back then, was hard labor, but it's a year. You fucking murdered somebody that was wearing white. Like, there's middle ground there, yeah.
You should have to spend a year pretending to be this ghost and letting
or running away from people with guns
you.
In the street. Like, your sentence is you have to try to survive for a year dressed as a ghost at night in London.
I would say try to survive, but apparently people will just push their fist at you, so you'll probably be okay.
In case you're wondering, though, the actual ghost, or rather person pretending to be the ghost, did eventually confess. As it turns out, it was an elderly shoemaker named John Graham who...
Jack the Ripper.
He had made a costume in order to scare an apprentice of his who had been telling ghost stories and scaring his children. So basically he was pissed at this guy because he kept, like, telling these stories and scaring his kids, and who I guess would probably not go to bed at night because they were scared. Can we sleep in your bed? And he's like, you fucker, I'm going to dress as a ghost and scare you.
Okay, that's a reasonable way to handle something. Somebody's
right?
pissing you off, dress up and torment a town.
Well, that's what, as far as I can tell, this Graham was never actually charged with any crimes, but that's because the best as anybody could tell at the time, all those tales were either like just random assaults, because, you know, people did get assaulted.
Fucking sitcom ending is this, where it's like, it was me. Oh, ho, 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 ho. Like, what the fuck? You know, like...
Well,
this is such a clusterfuck of
it
bad
doesn't
shit
seem
happening.
like he ever actually assaulted anybody. He was just scared. What I would have to guess happened from a person that has a reasonable brain was that there were just criminals assaulting people, and then this guy dressing as a ghost because he's a dumbass, and somebody saw the ghost and then saw the assaults and were like, they have to be related. But I don't know.
How convenient all these problems come together in one case, Johnson.
So that's what I mean. I set out looking for an honest-to-God, ghost tale, as honest-to-God as I believe ghost tales are, and instead found this really fucking stupid story about an idiot that shot a guy because he was wearing white, and kind of changed criminal law in England for good.
Yeah. Well, fuck.
I love his quote, though, and a lot of this is stuff that is as well documented as anything from the early 1800s could be, because it was an actual court case. But damn you, who are you and what are you? I'll shoot, and then immediately shoots.
Well, he didn't lie. So.
And that kind of brings into question, like I said, my guess is that he didn't think it was a ghost. He thought it was a person using the ghost excuse to assault people. But then why yell, who are you and what are you?
I mean, rhetorical question. We all know.
Yeah, I guess.
You're a ghost.
But I like to think
laborer.
He sees this man dressed all in white at night that just appeared in front of him because he stepped out of a fucking doorway.
He just showed up.
He wasn't there 1 second, and then he was.
I saw light, and then he was here.
I heard a bang. It could have been a door. It could have been ectoplasm. Who knows?
My gun. It was my gun. Whoops.
Yeah.
Well, good for them. They stopped a ghost.
Yeah, the hunting stopped, in fairness.
Yeah. Well, you got to know that guy was who was actually pretending to be a ghost. This got fucking out of hand. I was just trying to fuck with some asshole.
But you got to give the dude some credit for confessing, because most of us would have just been like, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I totally would have.
You bury that shit in the backyard in the middle of the dead of night and never speak of it again. Yeah.
Hey, what are you burning? No, nothing. Just some shit that I don't need anymore.
It's the ghost. I caught him and I'm burning him.
Yeah, the only way to stop the ghost is to burn all of my sheets. Wow, yeah, good stuff. Great stuff, in fact, and that's why we're number one on.
It's how it always works
on
too.
iTunes, not the iTunes, but my own iTunes. EYE tunes.
My tune, yeah. Every fucking time that I bring a stupid story, you get something deep, and anytime I bring a kind of a deeper story, it's a great balance. I'm not complaining.
I don't know. I think I'm just depressed or something, because I just bring a lot of fucking bummers that they start
Next
strong
week,
where it's oh man, this is going to be stupid and funny, and then by the end of it I'm just mad or sad.
He gave his wife one last hug and
it's off. Here's a guy who got a bunch of penguins, and then by the end of it the penguins had to sell his body down the fucking ocean, and a whale ate it.
That would be interesting, yeah.
And they loved him so, but then they all starved because he was the one feeding them. That's how my stories go. So, yeah, tune in next week when I talk about the man who had too many penguins.
The man that sat on his lawn chair until he died. He had no motivation to...
The man who hated doing laundry. Yeah, goodbye. Yeah. Bye. Goodbye. It's over.